I'm going to introduce Jill Busby from the Northwest Film Forum, who will be moderating this conversation, and she's also on our experimental jury, and Raven Jackson. So give them a round of applause as they make their way down.
Hello. First of all, so exciting to be here in conversation with you. I was gonna go to Sundance on behalf of my job. There were some plane things, if you recall, during that time, and I didn't make it. I started following you on Instagram. You don't have to follow me back, it's fine. It's not weird, not even after this. So I'm really excited to be here. This feels like very serendipitous, and I'm sure the audience is excited, and we're gonna leave lots of room for your questions, because that's what's important. I do have some in my phone, and if you don't like them, we'll throw all of them away, and we'll just talk about what you want to talk about. Does that work?
That sounds great.
Okay.
And hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Excited to be here with you today, and I will be giving Jill that follow back.
We can really go home. That's why I'm here. Okay. Okay, so you're a poet, if you identify that way. Okay. I read that you weren't ready to enter the adult world, which I think many people can relate to, and you find yourself applying to NYU. Will you talk to us a little bit about what the transition was like, and if you were scared, and if so, what scared you? And then also, what was exciting to you about that transition?
Thank you for that question. I love that question. Yeah, so I was studying in a graduate writing program, and I was about to graduate, and I was studying poetry specifically. And I had always been interested in film, but I didn't have a technical background, so in a lot of ways, it didn't feel possible for me. You know, I placed that limitation on myself. But as you mentioned, I didn't feel ready to enter the real world yet, and it felt like I knew that I had some more interest in studying something, specifically filmmaking, and it felt like a now or never moment. And I decided to take the leap. You know, I didn't apply with films, I applied with photographs. But I'm grateful I studied writing first, because I found my voice in writing and what I'm interested in, my obsessions, you know. But I was afraid, I was scared, you know. It felt, in some ways, you have to push past feeling like an imposter, you know, in filmmaking. But I think in my experience, it's in so many ways, the richness of lived experience, of things that aren't filmmaking, of experiences that don't relate to filmmaking, adds so much to who you are as a human, which then adds to who you are as a filmmaker. And I found that to be true in my experience and my journey becoming a filmmaker.
And can I get a specific what excited you?
It excited me to think on how to bridge the two mediums. I mean, I work across different mediums. I like to blur boundaries of things, and I find that there's a lot of filmmaking. I mean, they speak to each other, you know, and in the way I think about my poetry is very image-based, and so thinking of ways to translate that off the page was very exciting, and also coming off the page. There's a world where I decided potentially to study screenwriting, but I knew I wanted to come off the page. I wanted to, direct, to work with actors. And so that excited me to do things that weren't just me in my room writing.
Wonderful. We talk a lot in artist communities about the pressure to conform and to create something with enough commercial appeal, right? That it could further a career, bring us to the next level. Will you talk a little bit about how you learned to trust yourself and stand by your work when there's so much pressure to make something that's just commercial enough?
I think that's big. I think that's a big part of it, and I think it's a muscle to build. I don't think, from my experience, it isn't something you just, okay, and now I know how to trust. You know what I mean? it's a muscle to continue to build. And I think knowing what a yes feels like for you and what a no feels like for you has been something that's been helpful for me. When you're on set and, you know, a collaborator or an actor comes to you with something and you can tell it's not it, you know, and knowing how to trust that rather than feeling like, oh, you know, I don't want to ruffle feathers here, or maybe I need to make a change. I can tell I need to make this change, but then that might put us back. You know, I think really knowing how to trust yourself in those moments and to say what needs to be said, I think it's big. And so I for me, think it's important to, yes, know what your yeses and nos are, and to also, I think, just have, in the process of pitching All Dirt Road Taste of Salt, you know, we met some wonderful people, but, you know, sometimes it was clear that, ooh, this person, I'm excited by this company or this person, but it's clear this isn't the project for them. You know, whether they didn't understand it or some of the questions they asked, they could tell it just wasn't a right fit. And trusting that, okay, it's not this project, maybe the next one. You know what I mean? And so I think also when, if we're talking, you know, say for instance a feature, but any project really, because, you know, shorts, maybe you're talking to producers too, it's also, you know, finding those right people who are excited by what you're making and knowing for yourself, what are my non-negotiables? What are the things I hope to not compromise on? You know, I think those conversations with the you and you before we're talking to other people are really important, so you have that center.
This might be a hard question to answer, so if it is, just be like, Jill, no. Okay. What do those yeses and nos feel like in your body? Like, how do you know when they're there?
For me, a no feels heavy. It feels, yeah, it's hard to describe, and it's going to feel different for everybody. But for me, it feels heavy. Like it feels, whereas for me, a yes feels, I feel excited, lighter. It feels, it's hard to put a feeling to the word expansive, but that's what it feels like. And so, yeah, a no for me feels like heavy, and sometimes it's just, I need to sit with this. My producing partners make fun of me because I'm always saying, I need to sit with this, you know what I mean? But I know I'm someone who, sometimes I need to take time with something, and I honor that about myself. You know, I think that's a big thing, I think, too, is honoring who you are. There's no one out there who creates the way you create, you know, and not trying to conform to what the standard is. And so that's a big thing, too, is sometimes I just need to sit with this and see, oh, let me think on it, you know? But for me, yeah, a no feels heavier.
Okay, so I love when someone tells me about the nitty-gritty steps of how they created something and how that creation made its way out into the world to us, lucky us. And so will you tell us about the experience of making your first feature-length film, which we just saw the trailer for, it looks so beautiful, All Dirt Road Taste of Salt, and the process of getting it greenlit?
Yes, as I mentioned before, you know, there was a process of pitching the film, but before we even came to that, you know, I took a lot of photographs before I wrote a word of the script. I really needed to know what the film felt like, or smell the air of it before I came to the page. And so I did a pitch deck with a lot of photographs of landscapes in the South, the members of family from the South, so it was clear I knew this world, you know, and to get across this feeling to whoever was on the other side of the email or the table. And there was also some language in that pitch deck. So that was first, and you know, it's a little nerve-wracking for my producer because we're like pitching this film and I'm like, you know, working on this pitch deck. But that was, for this film, that was a process. And then, you know, I came to the page and began writing it. It was a lot of writing and taking away. And I call the different scenes and experiences. For those who haven't watched the film, it lyrically explores the life of a woman in Mississippi, and it does so from youth to her older years, and it's nonlinear. And I call the different moments and experiences of her at different ages portraits. And so I wrote a lot more of those than are ultimately in the film, but I needed to write all of it to get to what it is. And it's a short script, it's 60 pages, but I wrote a lot more than that. And then when it was in, I would say like, it was starting to come together, it was not yet advanced, but getting there, I submitted the script to the Indie Memphis residency for screenwriters for Black filmmakers at Indie Memphis, and Barry Jenkins was the judge of that. And I didn't know at the time when I submitted, and he selected it as the winner. And so that's where our paths first crossed. And then months later, when Maria Altamirano, who we went to film school together, and she was the producer on the film from day one, when we were ready to start talking to producing partners, we talked to his company, PASTEL, that he runs with Adela Romansky and Mark Sariak. And it was clear, you know, they were excited by the risk the film was asking to take. They understood me as a filmmaker, us as a team, like the film. And it was clear that they were the right partners. And that really started to, that was a really key moment in the trajectory of the film. And then eventually A24 came on board. And we were filming not a few months later, not long after PASTEL came on.
That was fast. Okay. And that's exciting because I have a question.
I forget how many months. It wasn't more than a year later.
More than, okay, all right. So as a filmmaker, and you talked about this a little bit, so I'm excited to see how you answer this, but you have a vision and a way that you've seen the film in your head and heard it, envisioned it, really. So how do you communicate that vision to a crew of people who aren't in your head with you?
Yeah, I think it's, of course, different for every director, but for me, part of it starts before you're even officially working with someone. I think that first conversation you have with a potential collaborator with the film is a big opportunity to gather information around, is this the right collaborator? Like if we're talking to a production designer, is this the right production designer, you know, for this project? And I think not just, for me personally, I don't just look at how talented you are, but how do we connect as humans? You know what I mean? Like a lot of it is just, do we connect as people too? For me, and I think of course that varies depending on the role is, but for people you're going to be working really close with, I think that's something to consider. But I like to first and foremost just hear how, you know, if I've shared the script and the pitch deck, hear how these materials have landed with them and what came up for them, how they were moved, what questions they have. And I think that tells you a lot. Are we in the same world here? Are you seeing the film similarly to how I am? And if you're not, how are these questions landing with me? You know what I mean? Because it is also interesting when you are coming at it differently, you know? That can be interesting too. And so I like to do that. And for instance, with Juliana Barreto, who's the production designer on the film, amazing production designer, she, when we first met, she had actually reached out to me. We didn't know each other. She was in the design program at NYU, but we hadn't met yet. She reached out to me. We had a general that went really well, just talking. And then when I was looking at production designers, I reached out to her. And what she sent me something when we had a conversation for Audit Roads, a deck with like images and speaking to feelings, and just her imagery really resonated with me and spoke to the sensibility I was looking for with the film. And so I think also if that is helpful too, maybe saying, you know, if it's a costume designer, production designer, and if you asking them to potentially make a deck, usually they, in my experience, will offer that anyway, but if you know you need it, asking for things like that. But I like to, I offer the deck first and foremost, which has my photographs, really speaks to the sensibility of the film. I also did some Super 8 footage that spoke to the film. I did a mood reel, and I also, there's language in the deck, but I also, if there's language that's not necessarily in the deck that I feel is important, I will send that. And I sometimes send music too. But I think just starting with a conversation and speaking about the world, being intentional with the words you use, I think can be helpful to land it, you know? Like, I try to be specific with that. Like I said, tactile a lot, and evocative and visceral, that I want it to be a bodily experience, you know? I think I tried to, and this is the language built, I didn't always have this language, but you eventually get to that. But yeah.
Does being a poet help you get to that language?
I think it helps, but I think everyone has their I want to say like way into that. You know what I mean? Like way into some form of specificity. I mean, it aids in a film like this for sure, because it's because of the films I aim to make. But I think knowing what the film is the biggest part, and then working on how, like, I think something that's helpful in working on how to communicate it is also sharing materials with, you know, classmates, with friends, and seeing how it lands with them. Like, what do they receive off of what you've written, or when you tell them, hey, this is, when you describe it, what are they receiving from it, and using that as information to how to adjust it to be more specific, or, ooh, this is where they're going, I actually want them to go here, how do I adjust it to get there? Because I mean, I got to the language just from a lot of, you know, applying to things, not necessarily getting it, and or even, you know, just allowing it to be opportunity to, adjust. And I think allowing for that time, however it looks for you, but finding those opportunities to get that feedback on how it's landing with people, I think is helpful.
And this is like a logistics question, but maybe people want something like that, such as, when did you get confident making a deck, a pitch deck?
It's a process of trial and error. I am a visual person, so I do enjoy communicating in that way, but it's for sure a process of trial and error. And I think, yeah, and you know, I use Google Slides. You know, I don't do, it's not like I'm, you know, using complicated tools here. I mean, I use Google Slides. I enjoy finding, I take photographs too, but if it's not my photograph, I enjoy finding images that aren't as often seen, you know, that don't, I think sometimes if you see imagery from a film, there's so much someone can put onto it, so I like to, when I can, find photographs or imagery that isn't as well known. But yeah, it was a process, and I think it's a tool, you know, to communicate the world and to communicate what you're aiming to create to who's ever receiving it. And I try to be intentional with that. And I think even beyond that, it's a tool for me to, in the process of making it, to answer some questions maybe I'm sitting with, or to get more specific on, ooh, when I see this photograph, yes, that's exactly what I'm aiming to make. Or when you're building the director's statement, if there is one in the deck, you know, to discovering a sentence that unlocks something for you. And so but it was trial and error, but I do see it for me as an important part of the process. And I don't know if every deck, like the deck I made for Audit Rose was very, you know, it had a lot of language, had a lot of photographs. I don't know if every deck I do is gonna look like that, but I know that it's probably always gonna be a key part of the process for me, because I think it aids with the discovery of the world and it's like a first glimpse into the little world, or the world you're aiming to create, and how you want the audience to feel,
I ask because, speaking of language, even the language of like industries can make people feel like it's inaccessible to be like, but what is a pitch deck, So you heard it here, Google Slides. You can get it done with Google Slides.
Completely, and I love to scan things, if there are libraries I love to go to, but also, just Googling images and copying and saving those and putting them in the deck. One big thing I love to say with pitch decks is we work in a visual medium, as filmmakers, and so when you do add images to as much as possible, not have them be pixelated, I think is a big tip I give. But yeah, I love keeping it simple.
So, speaking of hearing a film, will you talk to us about your approach to sound design?
Yeah, I love sound. I used to record sound, actually, and so from script stage, I have a lot of sound details in the script, but especially with a film, All Dirt Roads doesn't have a lot of dialogue, and so I knew I wanted the sound, and it doesn't have a lot of score in it either. It has score, but not a lot. And so I knew I wanted the sound design the sound to be, like score in the film in a way. And even in the more silent or the more quiet moments, I'll say, to really be intentional with, but what are we hearing? And there are a lot of rain is very important in the film, water in itself is very important in the film, and being intentional with, but how does it sound in this scene versus in another? But yeah, I knew I was aiming to create an experiential film, one that's really in your body, and I knew sound was a way to really aid with that. Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. Do you have any words of inspiration for young filmmakers who find themselves entering this world at such a pivotal moment for filmmaking, or for the arts as a whole, really, but anything that would make someone say, okay, I got this. I'm ready to get this done and made.
Yeah, that's, earlier you asked me about trusting yourself, and I think a lot of trusting yourself comes back to knowing yourself, and I think something that I want to offer is to really think about for yourself, why am I interested in making films? If you already know there's a project you want to make, knowing for yourself, beyond the industry, when I started with All Dirt Roads, there are so many people who said, I just don't know if you can make this film. You know what I mean? I remember early in the script stage, someone I really respected, I adore, I shared the script with them and didn't necessarily get the feedback I was looking for. I put the script down for months. There's a version of me that didn't come back to that film, And so I think it's important for you to know, why are the films I'm interested in making important? Why is this project I'm interested in making important? Why is this script important? Because there are going to be those people you push up against. You know what I mean? There are going to be those production companies that don't see the vision. You know what I mean? And you have to know. You have to know, no one else. You have to know, why do I feel moved to make this? And sometimes maybe it'll be actually, it'll be that no. But if it's a yes, like knowing that it's a yes, because again, I had to come back to the script, and I knew for me that it was something that, yeah, I feel this is really, I know I want to make this. I'm not interested in changing it in ways, and of course throughout the process it grows and evolves, but at its core I always knew what the film was, and when I came back to it I really knew, okay, I'm gonna make this film, and I'm gonna and figure it out, and like trusting one step at a time. And so I think knowing, again, that center for yourself, because there's always going to be people who don't see it. That's just unavoidable. Yeah.
What was it like seeing it in the theater with an audience for the first time?
It was really moving, yeah. Really moving. And I'm so grateful that when I watch the film, it's the film I aim to make. You know what I mean? To be able to say that. And it's a gift to be able to share with people and to have conversations after it, because it always lands differently with, whoever's watched it. And I think that's been one of the most enjoyable parts of the process is the conversations after, and just seeing, what landed with people, what stayed, yeah.
Has anyone said anything to you particularly meaningful? Sometimes we hold on to those words from someone who just really gets it. And I was curious if anybody said anything that really sticks with you and kind of inspires you in return.
Yeah, it's not something said in person, but that I read was that watching the film brought back her grandmother's hands for the first time in years, yeah.
Wow, okay. Okay. Hopefully you've been thinking.
I know that you said for the pitch deck, you try and put as much as, or jam pack it as much as possible with the world that you want to make. And I was wondering, because I've never made a pitch deck, I was wondering if you also plan how you want the camera to move. And I wanted to know how important is camera movement to you in such a tender, intimate film?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it'll be different for everyone, so I'm only going to speak to how I approach pitch decks, but I try not to put too much technical camera language in my decks, but I do, for instance, for the Outer Roads deck, I do mention I want to shoot on film. I mention how I want the camera to feel, and so I know I said evocative, I likely said intimate. So those are the big ones for me. If it's on film, I say it, and I mention, the texture, like why am I shooting on film? I'll put a sentence saying that, and why this film needs to be shot on film, I feel. And then I'll mention how I want the camera to feel. But I won't get much more technical than that unless I feel there's a reason I'm getting technical, like it's additive. But I tend to leave the more technical language to a conversation. And for your second question, yeah, the camera was really important, and finding what how to get to those emotions, that I and the team are aiming to create. And Jomo and I spent a week just watching things and talking about the emotionality of the film, and then doing the tech tests were pretty big, were really big for coming to what we landed on, and doing tests of the lenses. But yeah, the camera was a big part of, for me, getting to the emotionality I was seeking.
First of all, Thank you, Mr. Jackson, for your time. You briefly mentioned the feelings of imposter syndrome while you're going through that I think a lot of young creatives go through. I was wondering how you overcame those feelings of imposter syndrome and what self-discoveries you made as a creative yourself when overcoming those feelings in the process of making your first feature, and kind of in hindsight, looking back at it, how those feelings changed. Do you feel as though you've overcome those, or have they kind of evolved and pushing you along into your next film?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I think, something that comes to mind is Anna Rose Homer, who's an amazing filmmaker. She's a director of the FITS, and we were on the train in New York when I still lived in New York, and something she said to me has really stuck to me is she was speaking about something, and she asked the question, why not you? And so I think when these moments come, because they come for all of us, you know what I mean, where it feels that you feel a imposter or you feel that out of place somewhere, but why not you? Why can't you make an amazing film? And why not? Like, really sit with that question. And that's a question that I asked myself when that would come up for me. And I think it also, again, comes back to honoring yourself. And I think, it can feel cliche, but we are all unique. There is no one that's you. And I'm someone, like, on set, when I'm creating something, I don't like a lot of people around in the process. Like, I like as little amount of people around me or the actors as possible, and leaning into that. I think, and this is kind of, it's not necessarily a question, but it speaks to it for me, is knowing what you need to make your best work. And so, yeah, at the heart of it, I go back to the question of why not you? That's something I went back to a lot, because it's true, why not? Why not me? Why, and I think also having a community of people, like classmates, friends, who you can be honest with and open with when these moments happen, or when, there's some uncertainty or something that's affected you in some way, so y'all can be there for each other. That was certainly big for me, to have people to just be really real with and be there for each other, and have a space to be open with each other. But yeah, I hope that's helpful.
Hello. So it seems like Indie Memphis was really big to getting the project greenlit. Prior to that, what was like your experience with pitching, and did you think about, like, do you just cold email people? Like, I'm really curious about how you get from concept and having your deck to then who do you reach out to and how?
Yeah, I submitted to a lot of residency opportunities and grant opportunities, and I used it. Not only was I hoping to get, support in whatever way that looks, because of course, as filmmakers, you can use support, whether it's monetarily or time or with eyes on your project. But I also used it as time to adjust the language. And some of it, the first pitch I did was New Orleans Film Festival. They have something called an open pitch. And that was the first pitch I did, and I knew I was going to be nervous, so I wrote out everything I was going to say on index cards, and I ended up memorizing it, but I still brought the index cards just in case. And then someone on the jury, I ended up, being connected with, and so it was opportunities like New Orleans Film Independent, SF Film, and a lot of these have components where you will be pitching. And I think also being open to, like, even like at this event, you don't know who you're going to meet. Like, I've met at Indie Memphis or other places where I think I'm just going for one thing, I end up meeting someone who actually, exactly who I'm looking for. Ooh, I think, so it's a mix of seeking these opportunities to pitch or to develop your project or to get monetary support, but also being open to it coming differently. The only reason I knew about the New Orleans pitch was because I submitted Nettles, was a short film I did before Audit Roads. It didn't get in, but I got a personal email from a programmer saying, hey, if you have a feature, you should pitch here. You know what I mean? I would not have been there if I didn't know that, and I ended up winning the pitch. You know what I mean? So like, I think you have to also be open to it coming to you differently than how you are planning for it to.
So yeah, kind of going back into like the intimacy and the tenderness of the film, it's really clear that there's a part of you within the film. So I kind of wonder what your filmmaker journey has been with like vulnerability and allowing people to be, like allowing people into the world of the film while also preserving the sacredness of the story itself.
Yeah, and that's a great question. For me, it's being, I keep going back to the word intentional, but I think that's a big word for me. And leading with care is big for me. We made the film in Mississippi. That my mother's from Mississippi. A lot of the people who we spoke to who aren't first-time actors will remind me of family. But even if that wasn't the case, I would still lead with care. Of course, but. I think I don't step on a set and then suddenly I just become a different person. For me, I like to, create work in an environment that cares about the humans first, and I know in the intimacy I'm seeking in this film and likely in further films, I want to create an environment that allows that to take place, and that's not having AD screaming on set or, talking about lunch in a scene when hearing, lunch being spoken about when I know I'm trying to get this really intimate moment. So I think a lot about ways to create an environment for what I'm looking for. I think we can have fun while we're doing it. Like I believe that it can be an environment that has a lot of joy in the creation of film. Filmmaking can have joy, it doesn't have to be, yes, it is, we are on set, but I don't buy into the belief that it has to look like a very tense environment. I like to lead with care and intention, and I like to work with people who are excited about that too.
Hi. I have a question about post, because your film is obviously like more experimental and not a traditional narrative. When did you feel that the film was ready? And was there any pressure or pushback from A24 or PASTEL to shape the film in a specific way to maybe like appeal to a wider audience? And so how did you kind of maintain your voice throughout that process?
Yeah, I'll answer your second question first. No, there wasn't that imposing, or imposing of voices. I knew from, or of course you can't know until you work with folks or until you're in that situation, but I could tell from initial conversations that not only were both PASTEL and A24, as I mentioned before, they were excited about the film and excited about the risks, and were aiming to empower me as a filmmaker, not impose their views on what the film was on me, you know what I mean? And again, they understood the film. And I think it's important, it was important to me certainly, to find the right collaborators who knew what the film was and were excited about that, to not be in that situation in post. You know what I mean? Where it felt like there wasn't that trust in me as a filmmaker, especially with a film like this. And so it always, to answer your question, no, it always felt safe for me, especially as my first feature. I'm so grateful for that. And how you know it's done, for me, and again, I'm sure it's different for everyone, so I can only speak for me. For me, it's knowing that no matter what comes back, I'm proud, you know, like, because you can't control but like, and so I knew when it was like, ooh, it sings for me, like, this is it, and it took, you know, a lot. It was we edited the film for a year. Lee China Medical is an amazing editor, and he's in Thailand. We edited via Zoom. Yeah, late nights for me, early mornings for Lee. And it was, but we finished it in New York. We were able to meet in person and finish it in New York. And it was just, it comes back to trusting yourself too. It's so easy in this industry because it is such, as a director, there are so many people, and you really have to know what your center. You know what I mean? Like and that I had just me in the film, you know, watching it, and like I knew, and you trust that, and at a certain point, for me, it was such a long process in editing it. Like you're only really, by the end, you're only really still looking maybe at one or two things, or just really making sure it flows as a whole, which is where I was. And I think it's kind of, yeah, I'm not telling you a tangible thing, but I think you have to, because I don't think it's tangible. I think it's when you know, like I was so moved when I watched it, and I think you have to know, yeah, for me, that was it. I was really moved, and I mean, yeah, I hope that's helpful.
To go along with that, like rewatching your film, not as a serious question, but how many times do you think you watched it? And when you do rewatch it now, do you find new things about it that you didn't notice before that stands out to you every time you rewatch it?
I've watched it too many times. I don't really watch it with people that much, but I found like this year, I've spoken a couple times, and I'll watch some scenes with people, and it's really nice now, actually. I mean, it's over a year since the film first premiered now, and it's now I really do, because it's more distance now. Now I really do see more things, which is nice, and yeah, so I do. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's a living thing. I mean, and I'm curious what my experience in 5 years from now is going to be with it too, you know, but I do see more things now.
I'm trying to cover as much of the room as possible. Can I see all the hands right now? Okay, we're here.
Hi. I wanted to ask how, when you're directing or writing or in the editing room, how you balance critique and feedback from your peers.
Yeah, I think that's an important question, and I'll speak to it from, you know, let's say script notes. I think I like to look at it as kind of being grateful for the notes, of course, like, and I'm sure, you know, you get receiving notes from brilliant folks and being grateful, but a process of distilling it down to, okay, I received this note, okay, does this resonate with the film I'm aiming to make? Or like, how is it sitting with me? Is it one that I want to try? And just knowing that you can always, I mean, often, depending if we're talking about the edit or if we're talking about the script, you know, you can try it and then undo it if it doesn't work. Does it feel like one I want to try? Or does it just okay, this note, you know, I'm grateful that this person took the time to give it to me, but I can already tell it just doesn't resonate, and like allowing that to be the case. You know, I think having this process of how you take the notes in, I think is big, like not feeling just because I got a note, I have to do it. You know, I think knowing that how you receive it and like allowing yourself to sit with it, like if it feels like it makes sense for your film, or if it feels like it's in the category of want to try it, I'm not sure yet, let me try it, or if it's just clearly not for the film you want to make, that's okay. But I think in the process, you know, of building your career, I think finding those people who you know resonate with the films you aim to make, you know, ooh, like this person has a history of just giving me great notes, or like they really, in the edit, ooh, they always give me the best cuts. Like building that list of people, I think, that are trusted, I think is really important, and mentors, and that, so when you are, you know, sharing the script or sharing the edit, it feels like it's more of a space where you already know that these people tend to understand the work you aim to create, and so it's kind of already, like a lot of the work is done because you kind of already have that trust with who you're sharing it with. Yeah.
Hi, I wanted to ask, what did success look like for you five years ago? What does it look like for you now? And when did you come into the process of knowing yourself? Thanks.
Did you say complete the process?
Either come into, complete the process, like the whole process.
I don't think yeah, thank you for those questions. Gosh, we're getting real here. No, no, I don't think I think you're always growing. So I think it's a never-ending process of knowing yourself, but coming to it again and again and allowing that to be the case, allowing yourself to change a lot, you know, and your practice to change, and how I directed Audit Rose Taste of Salt, it might look different. My next film, my approach could look differently, and allowing that, you know, I think giving room to change and to learning, and then maybe wanting to adjust, or so yeah, I'm still coming into it, but Audit Rose making this film was certainly a big process of that, because I think it does take a certain level of knowing yourself to make work, to make art, and I'm sorry, what was your first question? Yeah, I'm trying to think on what I would have said 5 years ago. I'm not sure what I would have said 5 years ago, but today, like even I was speaking, the opportunity to speak to you all and to have conversation with people who have taken the time to watch, you know, my work in a dark room, and to have been moved by it. I mean, that's, for me, success. And there's it's the way people have been moved by the film, and have sometimes expressed that to me has been a big part of the success to me. And also to be able to grow with some people. I wouldn't, you know, like Maria, who I mentioned, the producer on the film, and Jomo Frey, we were on a short film together, and we all did this film. It's been really beautiful to grow with some people too, and so yeah, a lot of it's been about the people for me in a way I don't think I would have known 5 years ago.
All right, I think we have time for one or two more. Is there anyone in the back I didn't see because they had the lights on? So I think these two in the back here. Let's see. I'll go here, Natalie. You can take it first because I know you.
Sorry. Thank you. Hi. You have a lot of really beautiful short films. I first saw your work at Black Star years ago, and I wanted to ask you what you learned from doing short films and how those lessons like resonated when you were shooting your feature.
Thank you for that question. I think what I learned was I learned how I like to work. Like when I mentioned I like to create a bubble around set as much as possible, I didn't know that, I had to come to that. And those short films were opportunities to learn that through trial and error, to working a different way, and then trying that. And on a short I did, Nettles, it's a chapter short, it was filmed over the course of a year. We actually filmed 7 chapters. There was only 6 in the final film because one was more of a lesson. And so I think I also learned how to let go, how to be less precious, how to allow some things to be a part of one phase of the process and not necessarily the next. I think, allowing, in a big way, making shorts, showed me how to show me that just because something doesn't necessarily end up in the final film doesn't mean it's not good, doesn't mean it's not working, but sometimes it's just not right for that final film, and that's okay. You know what I mean? And sometimes that's painful. Sometimes you're thinking about, oh, but I spent this much money on it, but not just putting something in it if it doesn't need it. And I think that also helped in the script writing, because like I said, I wrote a lot more pages than is in the final script. So yeah.
All right, so we have time for one more. I saw your hand was up.
Hi. First of all, just thank you for being here. Very generous of you. What I wanted to know was, as a poet, you and being a writer, I wanted to know when writing this film that's like really quiet and subtextual in many ways, how are you able to look at a script and trust that moments that you saw in your head and wrote were landing before you had actors, before you had time to work with them and have them imbue the meaning or the silence with meaning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's a bit of allowing yourself to not fully know until you're seeing it with the actors. You can't know. And I know it's working on the page, but I won't know whether it's working with the actors until I see it with the actors. And for me, the script is just the starting point. And there's moments where, I'm watching the actor say a line of dialogue or something, and it's like, ooh, you can tell a word isn't working, or actually we don't need that line, And so I think being present when you are in those moments, like when it is coming off the page into the actors' bodies or the words are coming out of their mouth, to like really allow that to be a new chapter, and not how I like to work. I don't, just because I wrote it doesn't mean it's what's going to be happening for the scene once we're getting it off the page. Because again, it's a new phase of the journey and might want to look differently. And I'm always looking for it to look true, and something that looked true on the page doesn't necessarily look true with the actors, but sometimes it does, But when it doesn't, like making those adjustments. Because even, there's a scene in the film, it's a grocery store scene where, for those who haven't watched the film, where these two characters meet for the first time after a long time. In the script, there was a deer, and we didn't get the deer. We almost got a deer, but we didn't get it. And I was really like, thinking I wanted that deer, you know? And I found out early in the day when we were filming that we didn't get the deer, so I'm looking at the script. I need to adjust it. Okay, take the deer out, you know, condense the lines. And now for me, it's a beautiful film that I'm like, where would the deer even go? You know, it's like, I don't even, you know, but it took something not landing and then adjusting it for, you know, me to have to come to that. And so that's what I say, like, being loose, like, and on the page, you know, the deer works beautifully, but when we filmed it, it's like, it's one of the quietest moments in the film, and also for me, one of the most moving and emotional. And to think about me having to try to wrangle a deer, you know what I mean? It's like, and so, yeah, I think allowing it to be, to a certain extent, unknown until you do have the actors, and if you need to adjust, trusting that you'll be able to see what needs to be adjusted.
All right, thank you so much. Another round of applause.